Okay, and we'll just let that intro song, Auto Hoaxer GTFO, serve as a disclaimer. So, we don't owe anybody any apologies for not believing in any of the state-sponsored myths. And there's a major plot twist in the world stage coming up, the Trump election. Sorry, the election. I'm pretty sure it's predetermined, but it's predetermined to create a lot of turmoil, obviously. And Trump is coming to town here on Halloween, and I'm thinking I should go down there. I should go down there and go down with the purpose of asking people what they think about the fact that he performed a magic trick on July 13th. I think I should show up with a camera person and just go around asking questions such as, does it bother you that Donald Trump staged an assassination attempt on himself, and moreover, that the fireman's not really dead? And then see where I go from there, because I think we could probably bounce off that and say, if this is fake, what does it say about January 6th? Because the whole thing is obviously a farce. I don't expect it to get anywhere, but I am interested in getting some honest opinions. Because the more I look at the topic on Twitter, the more I see that it's kind of open season. You can be a skeptic, you can auto hoax anything, but people don't put it in the right context. And most people are stuck on the idea that somebody died. Suzette says ketchup gate. Oh yeah, definitely. The McDonald's thing was a clue. The fact that he went to McDonald's, he probably pocketed some extra ketchup packets for the next time. But there has been a lot of serious attempts to discredit the whole thing, but it's coming from these leftists. And I'm not coming at this from a political perspective. This is apolitical. In fact, I have election fatigue already. But what I am interested in is examining what we are looking at, propaganda in the entertainment media and otherwise, which foreshadows what happens on the world stage. And we've just been examining a steady stream, and this isn't confirmation bias. We have evidence of our scripted news-bent reality. So case in point, the New Yorker put Trump on the cover and they said Back to the Future, and there's just voluminous connections between Trump, Biff Tannen, and 9/11, interestingly. But it's been a very meta-scripty week. So let me play this. This is Trump saying something which sounds very coded. Just an obvious 9/11 reference. I mentioned this the other day, but I didn't have the clip. Here is the clip.
It's really together for 9 years, and in 11 days we won't be doing this any longer. We'll be doing other things. But so it's a little bit sad because there has never been anything like this done in the history of our country, and probably...
Anyway, 11 days. We won't be doing this anymore. It's been 9 years. Undercover CIA handler says it was staged. That's what the Vice is also saying, and they've gotten so SJW in the last 10 years. Well, this isn't partisan. It's not like he did it to trick his voters or become a martyr and gain more votes. That's ridiculous. This is a psyop that both sides are a part of. The whole thing is scripted. There's no other way to look at it. The shooting itself was fake. There's no reason to think that the fireman's actually dead. And if you think January 6th was anything other than a staged riot, then you're wrong. It wasn't provoked. It wasn't stimulated by provocateurs. It was simulated. The people calling other people feds, like Baked Alaska calling, what was his name? Was it the one who was Epps, Ray Epps? He was calling Ray Epps a fed. And it's like, no, that's a fed calling a fed a fed. Woo's News broke it down. If you're not familiar with the 21 minutes in which he breaks down January 6th, and he's working on part 3 of his series, that whole thing was staged. Ashley Babbitt's not dead. And I think that there's no platform for people who are skeptical. It's just a bunch of people who think wrestling is real. You're like, no, he really was shot in the ear. Okay, fine. That's why they have, it's a joke that Hulk Hogan is up there. I mean, he's up there on the stage alluding to blading where they cut themselves. And now he's, at this Madison Square Garden thing, flexing for the audience, being Hulk Hogan. I don't have any problems with him. I'm just saying that it's kind of ironic because believing in the spectacle is the same thing as believing in WWE, and that's not hyperbole. They faked a moon landing. You think they wouldn't fake an assassination or 2 or 3? I mean, it's interesting if you look at the Kennedy thing, how the most likely explanation is that it was a movie. that Stanley Kubrick shot Kennedy, not Oswald. Okay, let's see who has rolled in here. American Father, Suzette, Hero Paranormal, King Ravana, Isabel Ann, thanks for joining. Was it staged? And one more point here. It wasn't like they let it happen. It wasn't an inside job. The whole thing was theater. The way that the Secret Service fooled around, like the Three Stooges, that slapstick bit they did, all scripted, all rehearsed. And they did this so that they knew that the right-wingers would say, oh, it's a DEI. It's because they hired women who were too short. What are they doing out of the kitchen? And all those narratives popped out. And when people start talking about the details, they don't even notice the whole thing was fake. They get you caught up in these little rabbit trails. And even right now, Jack Posobiec's trying to hype up the 6:11 p.m. being an indicator that the armor of God protected Trump, which is absurd. You can't explain to me in any reasonable way why God wouldn't spare the firemen as well. Joined by Lean Dion. Ted Stryker says, amazing idea about interviewing Trumpers. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I will go interview Trumpers who are waiting in line. It opens up at 8 a.m. It's just down the street from where I am. I just want to hire a camera person, and I want to ask a series of questions, and I'll provide some graphics, and I want to maybe even print out a pamphlet. I'm not trying to be antagonistic, but I want to ask them what they think about the evidence suggestive of fakery. And I think it'd also be interesting to maybe print out a couple blog posts which list the predictive programming examples. Stuff we found after. The dead Trump in Beetlejuice. I mean, I think there's a lot to talk about. Maybe there'll be some Q people there. All right, continuing. Reverse history. Thanks for joining. And I still haven't released AutoHoaxCon 2, but I'm working on it. Shannon Jones. Oh, you're listening right now. AutoHoaxCon Hour 3. Yeah, it's very productive. So it's kind of like a panel discussion at points, but we each bring something prepared, and we're getting fakeologists on board for the next one. And they're going to get bigger and better each time. So if you missed the last one, the next one's going to be, I'm not sure. I have to make sure it doesn't conflict with Thanksgiving. Okay, Mason Free says, happy birthday, Bill. Oh yeah, happy birthday, Bill Gates. Tragic death date, Matthew Perry. Starting of Q, 10/28. I think it's also the birthday of the guy who invented the polio vaccine, and then Elvis was vaccinated on 10/28 on TV with a polio vax. There's all kinds of 10/28 stuff that we've uncovered, and others have as well. In fact, there's a Back to the Future reference. Again, Trump is on the cover of New York Post. They say Back to the Future. Back to the Future, Biff Tannen is based on Trump. No coincidences. Okay, here we go. This is interesting. The movie Inferno, about a millionaire who releases a virus to cull humanity, was released on 10/28. The North Tower collapsed at 10/28. The new tower looks like a needle. True. Francis Scott Key Bridge was hit at 128. And the climate doomers were saying we had 1,028 days left. But now, the Inferno thing is interesting, because Inferno's a Dan Brown. The movie stars Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks was the first person to catch the COVIDs, and he went to Australia, where he was on lockdown, and Australia was burning, if you recall. It was a big fire. They showed you pictures from space. It was just a big inferno. And then the lockdowns start, and they begin in Italy. In the movie Inferno, he wakes up in a hospital in Italy, and it's about a super virus that shuts down the entire world. And that's not because life imitates art. It's because psyops imitate art. There's a direct correlation between the staged events and the media representations of it in various fictional universes that overlap with the real world whenever they need to lie to us en masse. Leo Pratt says, no way it was staged. It said live on the top right-hand corner and someone died. Yeah, that's what a lot of people think. And the assumption that somebody died is what I call the bloody guardrail. And if you really examine it, it's all theatrical blood. But it does stop a lot of people. They think someone died, and they suddenly say, we can't talk about this story yet. Got to give people time to mourn. The body's got to decompose before we can question the narrative. And I'm like, no, I'm not even waiting for that fake blood to dry. And in some instances, like when Frank James fired 33 rounds into that subway, the Prophet of Doom, one of the blood bags didn't bust. If you remember that whole event, there was a person in a scarlet trench coat dropping off squib bags, and one of the squibs didn't pop until later. And there was a guy who was like crying into his phone, like it was a flip phone, with the fake blood behind him. I mean, it was a hilarious scene. Sadly, that was the only subway cart on the entire subway in New York that didn't have cameras on board, if you can believe that. And the star of the show, Frank James, is sharing a cell with R. Kelly, P. Diddy, and Sam Bankman-Fried, joined by Thirst for Truth. Thank you for joining. Patricia Steer says, hi, colorful-ish shirt. I think it's, I get these at the thrift store across from the gym. It's actually gym wear. It's breathable. It's comfortable. The color wasn't a consideration. Although, when I go to the Trump rally on Halloween, I am going to wear the Penguin Party shirt designed by X-Pac. And I have it here. Maybe you can see it in the background. It's all rolled up, but I'll be wearing that. And the whole idea is I want to go down where the Trumpers are lined up from 8 a.m. They will be lined up, and there will be a counter protest. I'm certain of it. In fact, I'll interview both sides. See which side thinks it's more plausible that Trump faked the head wound. Okay, let's see. Joined by David. Thank you for joining. Let's continue here. Get through the notes. So the 1028 connection. Elvis, polio shot, the inventor of the polio shot. Inferno comes out. All very interconnected. Bill Gates' birthday. And then the connections, of course, with Leave the World Behind. I mentioned this yesterday. Someone was asking, when is Tom Cruise going to the space station? And there's this movie that's called, if you haven't seen it, it's called Oblivion. And we talked about it about a month ago, where Tom Cruise is going down to this stadium that had apparently been nuked at some point. And a dog comes out of nowhere. And then it made me think about A Boy and His Dog, because there's a movie poster in Fallout for the movie called A Boy and His Dog, which is about a post-apocalypse, nuke apocalypse world, and this kid and his dog are wandering around. I haven't seen it, but I looked it up after seeing it alluded to in Fallout and Oblivion. Turns out Boy and His Dog is set in 2024. But for some reason, in a couple of days, Netflix is releasing Oblivion. So this might have some predictive programming significance. I think this is the one where he has the Elvis bobblehead on his spaceship's dashboard. And then it says here, meanwhile, Cruise will return to Universal for his long gestating outer space film, alongside Helmer Doug Liman, who he worked with in Edge of Tomorrow. It was initially announced in 2020, $200 million budget, and Cruise will play a down-on-his-luck character who becomes the only man who can save the Earth. Now, this is typical. He's generally represented as a savior. There's a lot of Christ typology, Gnostic Christ stuff, because he is the Jesus Christ of Scientology. But if you get into the weeds with Cruise's scripting, divorces all his wives at 33, that's weird. But the Top Gun movie, it's just replete with sun god references, Phoenix references. But it's not a surprise that he's a savior. And he's often depicted hanging, the hanged man hanging off of cliffs, off of planes, the falling man. These are all things we've attached to him a while ago. But his most recent public appearance was at the Paris Olympics, where he was the falling man. He rappelled 42 meters from the roof in front of everybody. So what's the significance of the falling man? There's quite a lot. I mean, we've looked at this specific archetype, but yeah, Cruise is a interesting character in this regard. But he's going to film it in space, they say. Some critical scenes in outer space with NASA and Elon Musk's SpaceX. He didn't beat the Russians. We didn't win that space race. Lee Dion said there was a huge initiative preceding Frank James for installing new cameras at subway stations to fight crime. Well, that scene was sort of like right out of the Batman movie that came out at the same time. And Frank James was called the Prophet of Doom. He was a QAnon type. He was uploading threatening videos to the mayor because of the lack of services for the mentally ill. The Riddler starts off killing the mayor because Gotham's not taking care of the mentally ill. The same issue hits Joker. But if you remember, the Riddler character kills the mayor with a tucker, which is a weapon. Well, it's not a weapon, it's a tool for carpenters, but he uses it as a weapon. And I think this is a direct reference to Tucker Carlson, who's being blamed for online radicals taking action and shooting up grocery stores, for example, because of the replacement theory. So you can look at how these are all connected. The day Batman comes out, Joker, Sarnath, the Boston bomber, gets his death penalty reinstated. The Frank James thing happens. And the movie starts out in a subway where Batman's fighting a bunch of Jokers. Joker starts in a subway where he's accosted by a bunch of rich people. So it's kind of like the same dynamic. It's really a class warfare subtext. And the idea of the people falling through the cracks who have to become villains are only villains because they're victims of society, so they're more like anti-heroes. And that's an element that's pretty strong in the Penguin series if you're not watching it. David says, yeah, Bill Gates turned 69 today. Well, my point of bringing up the fact that Frank James, his subway didn't have any lights in it, the subway car, it's just because it's typical. And the only footage you get is some flip phone of somebody walking by so fast. And that's another thing. When I say indicators of a hoax, I mean, if there are certain like hallmarks of a hoax, you can just start the body count at 0. Assume nobody's dead. And one of the indicators that's common is the cameras that they use or the camera walkthrough, where if there's a lot of casualties, you're not going to get somebody stopping and looking so you can notice this is a simulation, but rather the person will walk through really fast with a shaky camera, and the camera is out of like 2005, and they don't stop long enough so you can see anything. Atrocity propaganda. They leave it up to your imagination. Reverse History said Fallout's underground cornfields they pay direct homage to the imagery of the underground cornfields in A Boy and His Dog. Okay, so A Boy and His Dog comes out in 1975. It's set in 2024. Okay, moving on here. So the Make America Great Again hat that Elon Musk was wearing at Madison Square Garden has been connected to Frankter typefaces used by the Nazis. And it's because it was trying to break away from the Roman characters that were under, quote, Jewish influence. And this has been mirrored by a lot of people outside of just the conspiracy fringe. Like he's telling you who he is. The MAGA hat is meant to evoke Nazi Germany. They were calling this MSG, Madison Square Garden rally, a Nazi rally. They've been saying this for some time. But everything at this point is evidence of it. Could just be hysterics, but Musk is trolling on some deep level because this is symbolism. This is when I talk about like visual lies where they don't have to say it explicitly. You just process it. And this is in your face kind of symbolism. It's very consistent. I mean, it's all iconography anyway. Okay, here we go. This is a picture someone sent me. It's just notable. Look at the hand to the hat. Where have we seen that gesture before? We have reached peak cringe. A lot of people are finding this to be very disconcerting, Musk's performance. I don't know. I think the whole thing's entertaining, but let me play a clip.
Yeah. USA! 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 Wah! Yes!
It's like Keanu Reeves and Bill and Ted. Like, I don't know. What is that inflection? I don't think he's ever chanted that before. My Third Eye says, surveillance cameras always break down during major news events. Right. Well, a lot of people are wondering, on X rather, I'm not sure if this represents a lot of people, but they're wondering why Trump hasn't done more to investigate his shooter. It's like that story just kind of died. And people talking about it are who are calling it fake, again, they're really blocked by the idea that somebody actually died. That is such just a thought stopper. I intend to kind of counteract that. Military helicopters in front of the Capitol following drills. So they're doing a lot of drills. What does that mean? It means they're getting ready to fake something. You could just consider this to be a dress rehearsal. And again, we have many examples of drills overlapping with real events. And there was I probably have it somewhere in my crisis actor folder. There's a couple of crisis actors who kept on talking about how they thought it was a drill. I have a compilation. I mean, generally they say it was kind of like the drill we had a few minutes ago. But they said it was, I mean, this is what they do. They use these drills to put their assets in place. King Ravana says, a gripping tale of no Crook's parents. Well, speaking of the Batman universe overlap with the real world news, the shooter Thomas Crooks has been compared to a young Riddler. So you look at the Riddler, who kind of looks like Bill Gates, but the young Riddler looks like Thomas Crooks. The media has called Thomas Crooks an enigma. The Riddler's name is Enigma, and the Riddler, at the end of the movie, when he's locked up, is singing Ave Maria. 84 days after the shooting, Donald Trump has a minute of silence at 6:11, and that exact song is performed by a male singer. And I thought, that's interesting. They really do overlap these themes. Okay, moving on. There were arson fires at ballot drops in Portland, Oregon, Vancouver, Washington. So here's the scene. If you haven't seen these pictures, these are drop boxes being burned. Looks very psyop-y. Who's doing it? It's interesting how leftist accounts are saying MAGA's doing it in order to, kind of cast doubt onto the numbers, kind of make the case that the whole thing was rigged. Others think it's lefties doing it, but it's probably fake. Another 1028 thing. In Back to the Future, Marty wakes up to an alarm as it turns from 1027 to 1028. And it's playing the song Back in Time by Huey Lewis and the News. On 9/11, the number we call in emergencies, the towers fell in the order of 217. The North Tower fell at 1028. First Q drop 1028. Yeah, we mentioned that already. Now, these things overlap because they have a common scriptwriter, but the thing about the Back to the Future series is that it's one of the most explicit representations of Trump, where the writer says, yeah, this is Trump. American Father says, Yankees win following Trump theme. I've seen people alluding to that game as well. I haven't followed it closely, but I want to look into it. Another one of these interesting coincidences. Yeah, first Q drop, October 28th, 2017. This is the one that said Hillary was being arrested. And that one's going to come true, I'm sure of it. Just 2 more weeks. Isn't that what they say? Trust the plan, 2 more weeks. My Third Eye says the ballot burning is as fake as the political system. Well, I think on the right, they're pushing for all ballots, all paper ballots in person. So that's backfiring. 11/3, 6 days away, the long waiting period. Yeah, see, 11/3 looks, I'm not saying I'm hopeful, but 11/3 looks like it could be maybe the fulfillment of some predictive, prophetic, psyop event. Although 11/5 would be more consistent if you look at the Batman movie we just alluded to, where the radicals inspired by the Q character, the Riddler, break a dam. And now just think about the Riddler and his connection to Tucker. He uses a Tucker. And look at Tucker's role on the world stage and how he's seen as a provocateur. Obviously, this is how they've scripted his character, but the way that he is blamed for things, it's all by design. So the idea in the Batman movie of the Riddler's army doing terrorism to flood the polls on the election and put Gotham underwater on 11/6, well, that's on 11/5 that they do the attack. So 11/5 would make sense if you match it up with the Batman movie and the Penguin series, which just recently alluded to that. So now we have 2 movie references to 11/5 and a flood during the election. And then you can add on to this, November the 5th ties into Guy Fawkes and the QAnon movement, who would relate to the army of the Riddler. The QAnon movement uses the Guy Fawkes mask. That's the anonymous aspect of it. The Anons, who don't like it when you call them QAnons. They say, no, there is Q and there are Anons. If you call us QAnons, you don't know what you're talking about. And I'm like, okay, whatever, QAnon. It's very culty, you know. It's like, you know, I'm not going to play by their cognitive dissonance rules. But the fact of it is, 11.5, Guy Fawkes, QAnon, and of course the movie V for Vendetta, where that comes from, is an Alan Moore written script, and he's a meta-scripter, of course. But that movie also had predictive programming for 2020 and lockdowns. So I'm looking at 11.5 as looking like some kind of psyop-rich environment. I think it might be more likely than the third. Although Isabel Ann, and I trust Isabel Ann, says, astrology is wild, 11.3, very good choice. Well, 11.3 is an interesting date for a lot of reasons, as we've alluded to before. And that Barron Trump time-traveling book talks about a disputed election on a Tuesday, 11.3. Jessica Lynn says they went to 11.5, 55, and Back to the Future, 69 years on 11.5. Well, the significance of Gotham being underwater on 11.6, the 116, it also relates to the Trump getting shot at 611. That number, 611 or 11.6, has been consistently associated with the domestic violent terrorist threat. It's like the inverted 9/11, which is the external threat. And it's been a consistent pattern for some time. That's why it's notable that Trump gets shot at 6/11 and his people are saying this number has special significance. Yeah, it's Timothy McVeigh's execution date. But the number, again, in the Batman movie, has the right-wing representation destroying the election day with some kind of an attack. American Father says, I have those Barron Trump books. I'm about to read them. I've been thinking about it. I feel like I haven't done my homework. People are saying Ingersoll Lockwood's a time traveler, the author. And there's this professor who grew his hair out and his beard out, and he dresses like he's from the 19th century, and people think that he's Ingersoll Lockwood. And then I showed them pictures of the guy 5 years ago, before Q, and he didn't look like that. And they accused me of some kind of malevolent intent. But you know how it is. Truth sounds like hate to those who hate the truth. Okay, let's continue. Out of time, 10:28. Back to the Future. So Trump has been on the New York Post twice in very significant ways. Back to the Future, of course. We've talked about the significance, but also they called him Braveheart when he went to Butler, Pennsylvania, 84 days after his head wound. And Braveheart is the exact movie poster they emulated for the famous shot of him with his fist up chanting, fight, fight, fight. And that image of him and the flag perfectly aligns with his avatar on Truth Social, where he's got the American flag face paint, which is a direct reference to Braveheart. So this is beyond collusion. It's not coincidence. It is high-level scripting. I mean, it's artfully done, and it's very well integrated. So Kamala Dreams, this is a Twitter account who's dedicated to debunking the Trump shooting, has been compiling these really gross pictures of people who've had their ears clipped while getting their hair cut. Apparently it happens a lot. I nicked my upper ear cartilage a month ago with electric clippers while trimming my hair. And that's a month. Trump's wound from an AR-15 round healed in seconds. It's like Wolverine. Supposedly, Barron is starting a podcast and will broadcast it from an unknown location. Part 1, November the 5th. Supposedly. This sounds like some kind of QAnon fan fiction. Lane Dion says Barron is Nephilim. Yeah, I can't dispute that. He's definitely a source of intrigue for these noners, though. The QAnoners, they fawn over him. Like people fawn over Princess Diana. And they suggest that his mom is Princess Diana. So Trump and Diana created Barron, which is weird because Trump's BFFs with JFK Jr., who also had a fling with Diana. But JFK Jr. also had a fling with Ghislaine Maxwell, which also seems like a conflict of interest. Like, wait a minute. The whole Q movement is to expose this person, and then he's sleeping with her before the whole thing starts. None of it makes sense. Mike Wolf, American Picker Extraordinaire, says, good evening, fellow raft dwellers. Yeah, good point, Immortal L. Trump comes from Scottish descendancy similar to William Wallace. Yeah, there's an interesting connection there because the whole Braveheart connection, and I think that is 100% part of it. And think about Mel Gibson's significance to the picture. You know, he's a kind of a QAnon idol. They all think he's working for Trump. He's one of the white hats, but he directed Passion of the Christ with Jim Caviezel, who was 33 at the time. And Jim Caviezel died on the set during the scene, the fifth take of Sermon on the Mount. He was struck by lightning and he died. But he came back to life. And let's see, if you can believe that. I mean, I can't, but that is what he said. But then later he became the face of the human trafficking operations being exposed by the white hats in the movie Sound of Freedom. Interestingly, the character he was portraying, Tim Ballard, is being investigated for human trafficking. But all these characters are intertwined. I mean, Jim Caviezel's hanging out with Trump and they're watching Sound of Freedom at Bedminster. This is like a year ago. Okay, continuing. Isabel Ann says, they launched CV-19 when Saturn moved into Aquarius, ended it as it left Aquarius. Very precise and on point with their timing. Yeah, that's one of the things that I keep in mind, is that this is a story, it's a script, but ultimately I think the major plot points are based around what you'd consider the astrotheological. I think it's, and a lot of it is definitely timed that way. We have many examples. Good morning from the Netherlands, says Marcel. Thank you for joining. Ted Stryker says, ketchup does not clot. Yeah, I still think I should just buy one. I still think that if you got a MAGA hat with the 4547 and you squeeze the hyphen, I think it might actually have a squib. Might actually squirt some fake blood. But I thought maybe I should just buy one and then put a McDonald's ketchup packet inside of it, some inconspicuous red duct tape, and just make it look like it came that way. See what happens. But anyway, I'm definitely interested in going down to the Trump rally on Halloween. And I don't have a Kamala shirt. I'm literally going to wear the Penguin Party shirt. I'm not political. I don't want to be perceived as a liberal trolling conservatives. Like, I'm actually interested in talking to both sides and asking them what they think about the fact that Trump performed a barely passing magic trick with the whole head wound thing, the earshot. My third eye says, I like Caviezel's TV show Person of Interest, sci-fi involving AI. Well, he's the star of this QAnon thing. He pushed a lot of QAnon stuff a lot further than Tim Ballard did. Interesting, too, that Tim Ballard, if you watch the movie, there's a point where he's given some kind of a pendant from a child he rescues, and it has a Bible verse, Timothy 6:11. So again, the 6:11 has special significance to this entire MAGA cult, and that whole movie was about that 6:11, but it was a different 6:11, not Ephesians, but there it was. And I'm like, again, Timothy McVeigh, 6:11, executed 33, got his start at Waco. We have to mind map this stuff out so you can see how intertwined it is. But one of the main points I would bring up is that Trump kicked off his campaign in Waco 2 days after Netflix releases Waco, American Apocalypse. The timing of this stuff gives it all away. We've already received 100 messages today. Ted Stryker says, wear a NASA shirt. Yeah, I could do that. I have a NASA shirt. I would prefer to wear something IPS related because I would go as a representative of Infinite Plane Radio, and I'll bring business cards. But what I'd like to do, ideally, is have some posters printed out, the damning evidence, and ask simple questions. Do you think he faked it? Do you care? And I would not be surprised if a lot of people don't care that, yeah, sure, he probably faked it or something. Or there'll be convoluted theories like it was the deep state, there was a second shooter, he's on the water tower, which is where a lot of people go to. A lot of people automatically believe the thing is real, but since it doesn't add up, they have to add stuff to make it make sense. And this is definitely the case with the Butler thing. But all these additional storylines they add in there are deliberately inserted there so nobody arrives at the truth. And the truth of the matter, of course, is that this is a magic show. So I was listening to this podcast by Jeff Berwick. I think he's Dollar Vigilante. And he said here, 1984, The Matrix, They Live, Hunger Games, they're playing it out in real life and hardly anybody notices because they live in the Matrix. So it's a pretty decent talk he gives about what we talk about quite often here, about how everything we're experiencing has already been pre-experienced by basically everyone who's going to experience these future events through the form of media, entertainment. And I was listening to it for a few minutes, then I had to stop because he talked about 9/11 and how they're really killing people and these shootings are real. So this is just another example of someone who they see the scripting, but they think that the thing that it predicts happens literally. And one of my contentions here is that predictive programming is far more likely to lead to a simulated event than the real thing. The reasons are obvious. I think we're looking at just a advanced form of propaganda, an advanced form of marketing. Can you live stream it? Yeah, well, that's the thing. If I go down to the Trump rally, I'm going to have to bring a camera person with me, a third party, because I want to create content that has value long term. It could be noisy, but I want to have some level of professionalism in terms of I want to get the audio clear, and I want them to try to answer the questions, trusting that I'm not just trolling, which I'm not doing. I'm asking serious questions. But I will definitely live stream it. Mike Wolf says, if we live in an attention economy, what are you spending your currency on? Yeah, think about the mind junk. I mean, I've been harping on chemtrails for some time, but a lot of the paranoid conspiracy conjecture just takes up your bandwidth. And one of the benefits to being a skeptic is you're not obligated to believe in this garbage. You can just not think about it. I'm not worried about chemtrails or 5G towers or aliens from outer space, interdimensional demons, illegal aliens. None of the things that keep truthers doom scrolling bother me in the slightest. If I had guns, I would trade them in right now for popcorn, like ammunition or popcorn. Which are you reaching for right now? And that should kind of tell you where you are with regard to the Psy-War. And there's a lot of denialism, specifically in Trutherville, about the significance of predictive programming, how prevalent it is, and what it really means. A lot of people just want to say it doesn't matter. It's just coincidence, or it's just some kind of mockery. But they tend to understate the significance of it, and that's a mistake, as we have been pointing out for some time. But you have to include this in your perspective of what's unfolding here. And the fact that we're watching a movie, more or less, a reality TV show, should be enough to say, okay, I can unplug and disengage emotionally, and then pay attention. Paper mache aliens, says Diana Southard. Yeah, paper mache aliens. Those were, of course, where was that? South America, they had these aliens they found. They looked like E.T. They did look like paper mache. I don't believe in aliens. I happen to think that the New World Order religion of Nasatology needs to replace angels because they make people feel better. So they can't just take away everything. So you still have your judgy flood god. Now they call it climate change. You still have the idea of eschatology and end of days with World War III and the atom bomb. But I think they have to also maintain certain things like heaven. Space is a heaven that atheists can believe in, and aliens are a replacement for angels. Okay, let's continue. David says January 20th will be a dud. My only basis for making any prediction is what I see in the movies. That is the methodology we are employing here. And the movie Civil War makes it pretty clear that Trump is in and Kamala has to go take him out. That's kind of the movie in a nutshell. I don't know how they would divert from that, but we'll see. Was Dr. Jack Kevorkian a psyop? I don't know. I don't know enough about it. I mean, he was definitely creepy if you look at his artwork, but I don't know if he was a psyop or not. It'd be worth looking into it. Retro auto hoaxing. Like, I would sleep better at night if somebody could debunk John Wayne Gacy and Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, imagine not having to worry about John Wayne Gacy's and Jeffrey Dahmer's when you walk around. Like, oh, those don't exist. You know, it's like these could be constructs, hyperstitions. That's kind of what I think. Or Ted Bundy. I mean, I'm not denying the existence of psychopaths and sociopaths and sickos of all kinds. However, some of the more sensational ones are questionable at best. I mean, wasn't Ed Gein inspired by Psycho? What came first? And then, of course, Ed Gein inspires Texas Chainsaw Massacre. By the way, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I think it's The Next Generation. There's one episode or show where Matthew McConaughey has some kind of like robot leg, and he's a tow truck driver, and he picks up the victims and tows them to the ranch where they're all killed. And it turns out that the house where everybody is being killed is under surveillance by some creepy alien-looking guy who owns some newspapers. And apparently the FBI monitors this family 24/7 as they murder people. Very weird plot twist. And then you find out that the tow truck company that Matthew McConaughey character's working for is called Illuminati Towing. Very trippy film. Renee Zellweger's in it. I don't recommend any of these movies I reference. A lot of them I just watch for research purposes. The other night I watched Canary Black, and I knew it had to have some significance. See, I can predict predictive programming. I said there's got to be a meaning to this particular movie being number one right now on Amazon. So I watch it, and the movie is about this digital nuke, like a total blackout, shutdown of the internet. Just as Tucker's talking about how an EMP would kill 8 out of 10 people. Without power, we're all going to die. And this movie is about a digital nuke that shuts down the world. It's called Canary Black. And I'm like, that's interesting. The main character stops the guy from doing it all, but he looks just like Putin, and he sounds like Putin. So you have that as well. Well, Walter Walking, I've heard some of these disturbing things about Ted Bundy and others, but the thing about Ted Bundy that I find questionable is that the book about him was written by a friend of his who didn't know he was a killer, and she writes a lot of true crime fiction, or true crime fiction. So I'm just trying to figure out, well, what's real, what's fake? Did she invent this story? But I think it's awfully convenient that one of the top true crime writers happened to be best friends with one of her more popular subjects. So I'm just entertaining the notion that these are like modern replacements for previous superstitions, werewolves, vampires. Mike Wolf asks, have you watched Breakdown with Kurt Russell? No, I might have to. Synchro Morpheus did a breakdown of Escape from New York, and it had some interesting things about it. For one, he parachutes over a wall, very 10-7, but you have the one-eye symbolism. You have Donald Pleasant playing the president, and this Donald Pleasant character is Dr. Evil in the 007 series, but he's also the government figure who's in the 30-minute theater Newsbenders. But it's during World War III, President Donald Pleasant. Kind of interesting connections. David says, Ted Bundy is another Charles Manson psyop. Right, well, I'm certain the Charles Manson thing's a psyop if you look at who's connected to it. And I also think it's fascinating that I don't see very many true crime people looking at the connections that we're pointing out here. In fact, I did find a documentary today I want to watch about the Scientology connections to the Manson killings. But you have the Roman Polanski, Rosemary's Baby connection to the killing itself. You have Sharon Tate being killed, the wife of Polanski, being killed by Susan Atkins, who's a witch at the Church of Satan. That in itself is often, I think, understated, the significance of that particular character. You had Bobby Basoli. That's the guy who stabbed somebody with the Manson cult, but he was also in a Kenneth Anger film with Mick Jagger. And that film was produced by Kenneth Anger's... Kenneth Anger did Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome starring Marjorie Cameron. Like, it's just this tight-knit group of people. But what I'm finding is that it's increasingly unbelievable. It's less likely that it's real, and it's more likely it's some kind of terrorism involving theater and these very scary stories. It could be a form of terrorism, is what I'm suggesting. But the Kenneth Anger, Church of Satan connection to the Manson killings have a lot of interesting other threads that you could follow. Okay, let's move on here. They just settled the Polanski case. See, and his whole case was what? Drugging somebody with Quaaludes. And in his movie, Rosemary's Baby, Rosemary's husband joins the satanic cult. And they drug her. And then she gets impregnated by the devil. So there's this theme here of the drugging, which, again, it's this mirroring. And then, of course, you have the Polanski movie Ninth Gate, Johnny Depp. So there's a Johnny Depp connection in all this. That's kind of interesting. Ninth Gate, he's like this, looking for an old book or something. Mike says, why do you think they perform so many meaningless psyops that go nowhere? Oh, I think they're not actually just going nowhere with it. I think it's going somewhere. So, for example, after 9/11, now the government, the state, has a compelling interest in knowing what's in your pants. So you go to the TSA when you go fly, and they squeeze your legs and they pat you down to make sure you don't have any bombs on you. So that's something of a step forward in terms of our loss of privacy. Your presumption of innocence has been slightly stripped away. Then you advance 19 years later. Now, they need to know what's in your blood. So then your vax status, your medical status, these are private bits of information that are now not so private. And I think that's a further step in the direction of eroding our privacy. So they're trying to destroy the idea of the private individual, I think, the very concept of it. And the next step, which we're seeing evolving rapidly, will be where now they need to know what's in your mind, what's on your browser history, because now mind viruses are an even bigger threat than viruses or even bombs. So I think they are progressing quickly. And then if you look at the nightmare scenario of 1984, cameras everywhere, you can't avoid being surveilled, they know what's on your mind. Well, if you look at it, they designed society so that people would willingly self-surveil and publish and discuss and post their thoughts everywhere. So no, we've destroyed privacy. So I would say that these psyops lead us into places. They direct us like sheep. We're all playing our parts. Isabel N. says flooding the zones. Yes. Right now, I think these are called active measures, where they're deliberately flooding target demographics with messaging designed to confuse them. And there's a lot of confusion today. And one of the points I've been making lately is that you shouldn't be confused about body counts. If you see anything indicating that it might be a hoax, given the source, the lying media, you don't have to give them the benefit of the doubt. If you see the slightest indicator of a hoax, you can say, okay, it's 0 until proven higher. You can automatically just dispute your initial claim. Toxic viral meme-demics, says Lean Dion. Well, what they taught us in 2020 was about the existence of the asymptomatic super spreader being the biggest threat. So and Superman, if you remember in the Superman movie, they had to quarantine him, and he said, I've been wandering around for 33 years and it's been fine. And they said, exactly, that's why you're a threat. If you remember that scene. But the idea is that the healthy asymptomatic super spreader is a threat because they can contaminate all of the people with bad immune systems. That's why you had to lock down. And so if you think about that same rationale, how it's being applied today, they're saying you might be a healthy mind virus super spreader because these mind viruses aren't destroying your mind and making you do crazy things, but you're spreading them around on the internet where the mentally ill are picking these up and they're going crazy. And the public has accepted this. So the existence of the mind virus is not disputed. Now it's just a question of, have they isolated the disease X, that's going to necessitate the lockdown equivalent on the internet, as in quarantining, masking up your rhetoric a bit. In other words, how are they going to deal with the shared commons of cyberspace when one individual can necessitate a lockdown because of the types of behaviors that they trigger? And this all ties into 28 days later, the rage virus, which we have been talking about for some time. Okay, let's continue. Oh, Isabel Ann says, I wear a mask for you. Well, technically you should be wearing earplugs. In the series Hot Skull, which I think is a must watch, Hot Skull is about a society locked down because people are catching a mind virus by what they hear. So everyone's mandated to wear earplugs. And if you see somebody walking down the street not wearing earplugs, you run. Because if you hear what they say, you might catch it. And you might start spreading this stuff. And you start talking. And they call it the jabbering. You just start talking. So right now I'm jabbering. And they would call me a jabber. Which is kind of a dig, I think, at the anti-vax people. But the movie, the series, Hot Skull, focuses on one character who listens to all of the recordings he can get. Like, what are these people saying? And the more information he takes on, obviously, the bigger a threat he is to their lockdowns. And his skull heats up. That's the other side of it. And it's just, obviously, it's all just metaphor. And so when I have the image of on the Insider tabloid cover of the penguin with the flaming head, the burning head, that's a reference to Hot Skull. Because that's what we're dealing with here. We are trafficking in what they would consider to be mind flu, mind viruses. And one more point. If you're exercising critical thinking, suspension of judgment, skepticism, looking for more facts, and resisting all the emotional appeals and not giving them the benefit of the doubt, then you are inoculated against the mind viruses. The general public doesn't do any of that. They're force-fed so much news that they don't have time to parse through it, and so they just accept it passively. That's why I say that the mainstream and alternative are both passive news consumers. You're not active unless you're pausing and suspending judgment. But those who are not suspending judgment or exercising any critical thinking are not filtering the mind virus. And this is by design. That's why I say the government gave everybody mind aids, turning them into believers. Believers, not knowers. And so here we are splitting up into the third branch of media, the parallel media. And what distinguishes us is we are knowers and informed disbelievers. So not to point fingers, but I was listening to this podcast with this dollar vigilante, and he thinks people die at these events. So I'm just saying this person, like many people, have given benefit of the doubt to the story as presented, although they add on their own particular brand of extra information, their own scapegoat, or whatever it happens to be. Usually it's a different scapegoat or second shooter, third shooter. Isabel Ann says the digital IDs are next. The Vax card was to get used to showing status. Yeah, I think 2020 was largely a matter of synchronizing this world government, imposing a new religious paradigm, splitting society into the saved and unsaved, those who trust the media priesthood and those who protest against it. And they made that schism very clear. Now that they have that done, their next step, I think, is to train us on the concept of the mind virus by basically presenting it as analogous to the real virus. And it worked. And now you're going to see another correlation here. So if you look at the evolution of the safe space and I call this the safe space age. That's what they're moving toward. So originally it was you had to have safe spaces on college campuses to protect left-leaning people from conservative ideas. It wasn't the other way around. At that time, that's what the safe spaces were for. So the left could be quarantined from right-wing mind viruses, ideas. That evolved into state-mandated social distancing so that we could all be protected from the physical virus. And then they realized half the population is not going along with the programming. So now, and it's because of mind viruses, so now these mind virus carriers are carriers of the real virus because of the mind virus they caught. So they kind of conflated mind virus and physical virus, and they put it on the right. So they made this connection. So now the right-wing misinformation, conspiracy theories constitute a threat to our physical health. And then if you look at what happened recently with these hurricanes, they made the case that these conspiracy theories about weather weapons and chemtrails have endangered FEMA, have endangered meteorologists. So they've been consistently making these connections. And you'll notice the right wing is the scapegoat for the coming censorship agenda. That's why Elon Musk is playing this part where he's in control of Twitter, which is X, the source of disease X. And again, California blocked him from expanding his rocket launching operations, and he's suing them. But interestingly, it's because of his online rhetoric. So I've already made this connection before about Musk being the top disseminator of mind junk and space junk, and how there's an analogy between the shared cyberspace and low Earth orbit in outer space, and how both of these are basically metaphors for our collective worldview, which they control. Again, the space program is not about taking you to Mars. It's about the inner space and controlling your perception of it, your worldview. Framing your entire existence. Nicotrauma says, trying to convince people nobody dies in these events is impossible. We shouldn't proselytize, but I try anyway. Yeah, there's a reason why they won't understand it. Because they fall for the appeal to authority represented by the screen. Mostly it's ignorance, but I would say it's fixable, but it requires an entire paradigm shift that you cannot just talk somebody through. The best way to approach this, in my opinion, is to reach those who've already walked through Trutherville because they figured out the mainstream was BS, and now they're finding out Trutherville is alternative BS. Those individuals are reachable. And if you get a sizable enough number, then I think you might be able to reach people when they see that there is a sizable demographic who are on the same sheet. A lot of people just won't go unless the crowd goes that way. So it's kind of a lost cause trying to convert them anyway. Nicotrauma says, normies believe the stories and MSM plusers believe the bad guys are killing everyone. Well, they're both auto-believers in that respect. And there's no skeptics. There's no place for skepticism. And truthers are deluding themselves if they think they're skeptics. No, they are skeptical of mainstream. Mainstream is only skeptical of alternative. But that's just the nature of the box. And I don't think you can pull people out of the mainstream box, but you can reach people in the MSM plus box. The least reachable people are in Woketown. I would never even try. Not that I try anyway. I almost feel like cult deprogramming is almost a form of therapy. Like they should actually have to pay you. Like you want to be disabused of a lot of hyperstitions, lies, propaganda, maybe even a dystopian worldview you've internalized. You want to purge yourself of any sort of programmed misanthropy, because that's what a lot of the media does. It's going to cost you a little bit. Like, I don't know if this should be, I mean, it is a service. It is almost like some form of therapy. And if you look into the subject of cult deprogramming, all the elements are there. The MSM it is the dominant worldview that it presents collectively, but I would argue that it is the state church. And and I'm talking globally, that the global worldview that we share, promulgated by this mass media, is essentially a religion. I say nasatology, doctrines of scientism, and I don't mean this like hyperbolically. I'm like, it's literally a religious paradigm, and they've just found one that all of the traditional religions can fit beneath. And the purpose of 2020 was to introduce a concept of sin, but that can be defined by science and the salvation, the Eucharist, the priesthood, and those who reject the Eucharist and the priesthood. I mean, they've just created this template for control. Ryler05 says they've made conspiracies uncool. A lot of young people get creeped out by anybody who's into conspiracies. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I notice a lot of MAGAs are being ripped on by people for these fringy beliefs, and I think they've done this on purpose. Well, obviously they have. It's amazing what they do. They put these people in front of these conspiracy theories that are designed to creep people out. For example, we have so many examples of characters, but it's just like 1 minute you're on Twitter and you see, let's say, Stu Peters, and he tweets, and he never got back to me after he agreed to come on here. So Stu Peters posts something suggesting NASA's lying. Like, oh, look, ISS fakery. Retweet that. And his next tweet is something about how he hates non-whites and he's walking down the road holding a noose. And it's like, okay, I see what they're doing here. They're contaminating this field of thought. So what I have decided is we have to quarantine from alternative media because it's contaminated and it's the target of many active measures to discredit anybody who adheres to it. So what we're doing is we are forming this third branch of media that rejects all of their presuppositions about false flags, people dying, about the deep state. All that garbage can stay in Trutherville. Lean Dion says his bosses told him to run from IPS. Yeah, the thing is, Stu Peters was mocking Tucker Carlson for not letting him into his event. And then here he is dodging me. And look, he did promote me. I said, hey, this is me. He promoted me. He said, this guy claims the International Space Station is fake. Hello, Stu. What about this week? Call in any evening. We can't wait to hear from you. And I have some very specific areas I'd like to get into with him having to do with media fakery. But yeah, his boss has probably told him. So does everybody here think it's a good idea for me to go down to a Trump rally and ask them what they think about the hoax? Or if they think it could have been a hoax? Yeah, the term conspiracy theorist supposedly came from the CIA to get anybody questioning the JFK assassination smeared. That some people dispute that, but I think it's pretty much true. A conspiracy theorist, but they changed it. A couple of years ago, I noticed this pattern where a conspiracy theorist, which makes you sound smart, like you have a theory, they changed it to conspiracist. And I was like, wait a minute here. How come the media lockstep is all using the term conspiracist? Because every time I see conspiracist, it looks like racist. Conspiracist. New conspiracist. And I see these headlines that seem to emphasize this. Conspiracist worldview. Look, 5 days ago, family wins a lawsuit against conspiracist who called bombing a hoax. A MAGA conspiracist is launching a lurid lie about Tim Walz. Alex Jones, the conspiracist. So, you're not even a conspiracy theorist anymore. You're a conspiracist. So, of course, they smeared it. And I make the point that we're not conspiracy theorists here at all. We are, if anything, conspiracy. I mean, I wouldn't even use that term. We're media analysts. We're not conspiracy theorists. We're not paranoid. If anything, we're jaded media analysts. Nicotrauma says, you might incite a fist fight if you're trying... interesting. Besmirching their dear leader. Well, I intend to talk to both sides. Too valuable, don't go, nothing to gain. Okay. The way it would work is cameraman, me, talking to people who are willingly engaging and asking them a few questions, getting some clips, putting those clips on YouTube. And if anything, it's just going to draw more traffic. Perhaps even the types of people who are questioning the Trump event and other similar events. Woo's News, for example. I would like Woo's News to do the granular examination and takedown of 713 as he's done with 1.6. Like it needs to be done. For those who are unwilling to just categorically debunk these things, recognizing it immediately, some people need to go through it frame by frame, and that's fine. I think it deserves the attention. Like, what is that Vincent Fuchsia doing in the background? All these characters are just very shady, too closely connected to Trump and his inner circle. But yes, Halloween, Trump will be here in town. I do have an opportunity to go in person and talk to some people. Roberto, 1978, says they would say, yes, maybe it was a hoax, but voting Trump is better than Kamala, false dilemma, illusion of choice, illusion your vote matters. Exactly. I think they're at the point where they'll say it was probably a PR stunt and good. Like they probably would side with them. They're at this point, I think, where anything goes. The end justifies the means. Because that's where a lot of people are at with the moon landing. Like, yeah, America had to fake it to trick the Russians. What's wrong with that? You cannot go to a Halloween event and not dress up as a penguin. I do have a penguin party shirt. Ms. Al says, might as well go and see if you can chat him up. Yeah, I'm just looking at this as an opportunity to maybe get some serious questions asked. And I'm kind of curious to see if there's any QAnon presence there. Maybe Marcus Goldfinch will be in the mix. Speaking of which, in 2 days, we have a pre-trial hearing in my suit versus Google and Goldfinch. So we're just 2 days away. I asked for a summary judgment. Google asked to be let go because they don't feel like they're responsible for what some employee did on their behalf, using their software, using their computers. But we'll see. 2 days from now, we'll learn something. It's an active case. They tried multiple times to dismiss it. I got Goldfinch served at the Marco Polo headquarters. And last I heard, he's hiding in New Zealand because he says the DOJ is being weaponized against him. I put in a FOIA request with the FBI to find anything regarding my reports against this person. But yeah, I haven't talked about it much because we're just so close to the finish line. Not that it's going to be finished, but if it goes to trial, I'm happy. That's fine. I'm totally fine going to trial. If it doesn't, it makes a lot more sense. I mean, it would save time. If it doesn't, it just becomes a collection matter, and that's very easy. And it's almost fait accompli. You're looking at a guy who's about to be doxxed anyway in the Hunter Biden lawsuit. And once I have his address or the address of his attorneys, I can automatically go collect my cyber squatting damage complaint. So there's going to be a lot happening in the next few days. Angst G says, one of these alt-right truthers are claiming that Trump's body double did the Rogan interview, citing the height discrepancy as evidence. Lean Dion says, no MAGAs will admit they think it was fake and most likely genuinely believe desperately. Will be good content, Qs especially. Yeah, there's an opportunity for something going viral. And if somebody takes it the wrong way, it's not going to make me look bad. It's just more likely to get the issue out there. Okay, so here's a picture of Joe Rogan next to Alex Jones. Now, I think that's fake. Joe Rogan, okay, we're looking at different images. Joe Rogan is taller than Ben Shapiro. So what's the dispute? The dispute is that Joe Rogan is... Okay, I see this. Same head level. Interesting. It says here, it's impossible to say with certainty based on available evidence, but odds strongly favor it was the fake Trump. In addition to the height discrepancies, notice the much smaller Joe Rogan's head, but it's much bigger than the larger Donald Trump's head. Notice how the camera isn't focused on one individual or the other. took a little time to find this momentary screenshot. Joe Rogan claims to be 5'8", but let's see here. There's no way he's taller than 5'5". Some say 5'3". Anyway, I don't buy this Trump body double thing necessarily. I mean, the twin stuff is hard to deny that there's a lot there in the way he's been represented, this twins insinuations, but I don't know. I'm still looking. Because twins would be the same height. And height is something they would get right. Because the hyper-realistic masks are so sophisticated that there'd be no reason to settle for somebody slightly shorter. But we were talking about this yesterday with Fakeologist, and I think we both kind of agreed that his personality would be very difficult to emulate. And for a 3-hour interview, no way. Truman B says space travel's fake AF. Well, I think there's a stronger case to be made that space travel is fake than the Earth is flat. Like, these are almost separate discussions. But the shape of the world has kind of taken all of the oxygen out of that whole conversation. It's like, we should be talking about the media fakery. But one of the consistent things I've noted is those who argue in favor of believing NASA's garbage special effects believe all the fake news. So they're already compromised. Some guy showed me this picture of an astronaut squirting ketchup into his mouth. And he said, this is only possible. This could only have happened in outer space. That's his argument. That this proves outer space travel is real because this guy's squirting ketchup into his mouth sideways. And I'm just thinking, we need to frame this as a magic show. We need to frame this as a reality TV show using special effects. And to just suggest that this isn't possible except in space is weak. It's naive. It's willfully ignorant. It's an argument from incredulity. It's really a terrible argument. But I don't really think you can get anywhere with the people who are convinced by this type of stuff because, again, they automatically believe all the fake news below. So what does that say about them? It says that they are MSM, mainstream mediated. They have a massified mind. David says Kamala wins by a landslide with 110 million votes. Ryla05 says, I've heard people like Adam Green say the Earth is round because SpaceX sent satellites up to take pictures. Right. I was watching some old Godzilla flick last night. It just came on after Canary Black. And no, it was after The Penguin. And so this Godzilla movie has this scene where the astronauts are on the moon and they have this rocket come back down to Earth. And it came out in 1969. And the rocket lands just like one of Elon Musk's rockets. You even see it, like camera view, going through the clouds, and it lands perfectly. And I thought, they haven't even improved their concepts. And that was projected. The movie said it was set in 1999. So 1999 as viewed from 1969. But the special effects in Godzilla are the same. It's the same shot, the same cuts that Musk uses today. None of it's original. But I understand why some people still just assume it to be real because they've accepted the screen as an authority. They know that the people on the screen lie, but they don't think the screen lies. And that's a fundamental distinction. It's the difference between calling it fake news because somebody's got a bias and calling it a simulated event. It's a major difference. But someone like Adam Green, for example, probably believes that he believes in all the death tolls. So that's one of the differences that we have to make clear at the beginning here is that if there's any evidence of hoaxery, predictive programming, any conspiracy, if it's not real as presented, your starting point should be 0 dead because they don't kill people in simulations. And those who say, well, they have to have killed people because they're so bad. Well, then who? Some will say, yeah, some people had to have died. At least one person died in Vegas. Some people died. No, those people, I call them death clingers, are hanging on to an old model that no longer works. It's not even accurate. The false flag or real model. And if you're clinging on to that, my challenge to you would be, well, then find me the bodies, because you're on team MSM. They can't prove anybody died. How are you going to do it? And then you find yourself in the position of freelancing or just voluntarily doing the media's job for it. Like, let me go investigate this event and get some facts to help the media because they can't prove it for themselves. You see, you don't need to accept that burden of proof. So someone like you mentioned, Adam Green, who believes the Earth is round, it has to do with the fact that he's accepted the authority of the screen itself, even though everybody on the screen's a liar. And that's where truthers are at. Everybody's a liar. They don't trust anybody, but they trust the screen. Like, I heard some people say embarrassingly, hey guys, I think this thing with Trump was real. I think they did shoot him by the ear. I'm like, whoa, how'd you get there? You're inoculated against mind aids. The next thing isn't going to be real. The next shooting's not going to be real. The next moon landing is not going to be real. It's going to be fake, 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 because this is how I know this. The reason they're faking news is because they're steering our collective worldview, and they are day by day writing history. And of course, those who control the present, control the past, control the future, conquerors write the history. And we just have to accept that the masses have been conquered. And if you need any more evidence of that, look at 2020. Roberto says, what are your thoughts about the chances of and how an internet shutdown, cyber attack shutdown, backhack, force digital ID, panic the masses, and provide the solution? Good question. Now, this movie Canary Black was interesting because you had the Putin guy, you have the blackout, but instead of an EMP, which would be hard to fake, they did a digital nuke. And then we had the Cyber Polygon event, which was planning for a digital nuke, and they canceled it. And on that day, they had some real event happen that shut down in Canada a lot of communications networks and caused a lot of problems. So this is kind of their MO. I think that they are going to do something because of this latest set of drills that they're preparing for the 5th and the 6th and the 7th. But the script has consistently said, blackout, leave the world behind, white noise. And white noise is worth talking about in this regard because white noise is the one about the train derailment, and then you have the toxic airborne event and this mushroom cloud. It takes place in Ohio. Then after this, you have East Palestine, Ohio, train derailment and a mushroom cloud. And even the media noted, it's just like the movie. Some of the extras from the movie had to be evacuated from East Palestine, Ohio. So you have this direct connection here between white noise and a real world event. The main character in white noise is Caesar from Megalopolis. So Caesar from Megalopolis is a Trump stand-in. He even gets the head wound. Interestingly, East Palestine is 42 miles from Butler, Pennsylvania, and it's been commented on as being two highly significant areas and the area in between. But the two agendas there, the toxic airborne event and fallout, blackouts, which is how white noise ends, and the head wound. So these two events seem to go hand in hand. And it's interesting that the same character is the face of Megalopolis and white noise. And Megalopolis, this character, again, has a head wound, resurrects, but it also has the Russian satellite 9/11ing New York. After the destruction, they rebuild. So you have this repeated theme of there's going to be some kind of a blackout, the fall of the Tower of Babel, and then they rebuild it, but this time, no conspiracy theorists. This time, no disease X. This time, you don't get into the commons without your mind being vaxxed. So I think what they're looking to do, and I think this has been the agenda for a long time, is they're treating your smartphone, the screen, as the new Bible, in the sense that this is where you get your state-approved worldview, completely censored. But they haven't completely censored it yet. They have to get to that point. But once they're at that point, then they will have their perfect closed system. So they have to basically lock down the internet. But they're not going to be able to accomplish this without the acquiescence of the public. And the public will be convinced of it, just like they were convinced to lock down for 2020. All it's going to take is disease X, the rage virus. Right wingers going crazy over the election or whatever happens. And this is all foreshadowing, as we've seen in the movies. People will demand it. Truman says, Tim, definitely check out the rally. Well, my objective again, and I put this in the newsletter, is I want to hire someone locally to do the camera work. And I would just be there from 8 a.m. to about 10, maybe later if there's more. Just a couple of hours, getting some questions asked, getting some answers, and creating some content. I might stick around and watch the rally itself. I'm not sure. I could live stream it. It just depends on my battery. But I'm definitely interested. It's going to be on Halloween, and I know there'll be a lot of counter protesters, and I think it'd be interesting just to see what people think, man on the street type questions, because a lot of the people who are going to these rallies aren't going there. They're not asking these types of questions. High Impact Flicks went to a Trump rally, and he asked, what should I ask these people? And I said, ask them if they think Trump faked his assassination attempt. I don't know if he did, but I'm not going to pass up on this opportunity. So my plan is to go. And I have a couple of days. I will find somebody, someone who can record it. And of course, I'm aiming for content that can go into the later documentary, The Auto Hoaxer, which we are working on. Okay, phones are open, 505-510-4226. Let's go ahead and continue through my... here's a quote from George Orwell. Journalism is printing something that someone does not want printed. Everything else is public relations. Now, he's probably being ironic there, but I think the idea of it being public relations first, propaganda first, yeah, it's pretty much that bad. So Jack Hopkins here has 278,000 followers. He's got a podcast, and he's a former Republican. And he's been saying for days now, there are reports that at least one of the assassination attempts was staged. The MSM is sitting on the story. And I've been sharing a lot of content with him. We've been kind of going back and forth. And a lot of people are agreeing with him. So there's a lot of people looking in this direction, but they don't have the right context. So I think if I were to go out there and create some content, I might be able to perhaps even get an interview with some of these bigger channels who are talking about this. We can get a lot of good exposure. Algae Rhythm says you could set up a table with an appealing sign that invites curiosity. Like Trump faked his ear wound, prove me wrong. Like Crowder does. Bach Precision says, Rogan looked dismissive when he asked about the ear lacking wounds. Yeah, that's a interesting one there. Like, what do you all think? Does Rogan know it's fake? How deep is he? I mean, my contention here is that you've got the masses who are programmed. You have a small group of us constituting the deprogrammed, but then you have the programmers on top. And this would include people like Joe Rogan. But the thing is, these programmers are easily 99% programmed. I would think that they would only be let in on the very specific psyop they are a part of. They're not meant to see that this psyop is part of an entire collection of psyops, a network of fake events that exists in a fictional universe. These are not isolated. There are no isolated psyops. This is where truthers get it wrong. That's why I always bring up the forest and the trees. They miss the psywar for the psyop. N.A. Literalist said IPS will be a left-winger at the Trump rally. I don't have a Kamala shirt. I mean, I could wear one, but again, I don't want to be politicized. I don't want to be political. I'm not trying to take sides. We're above that stuff. I mean, honestly, it's like George Bernard Shaw said, never wrestle with a pig. They both get muddy, but the pigs like it. And the fact is that the left-right political horseshoe spectrum, it's a big mud pit. It's been mud flooded with mal and mis and disinformation, and nobody cares. Both sides lie with impunity. They feel like it's their duty to tell the truth, even if they have to lie and say something that's pretty much true just to get the truth out. Roberto says, where are you going to go to protect yourself to not be, what do you mean? Oh, you mean, no, there's no escape. There's no off the grid in that sense. The only way you can be off the grid is mentally. Like if you're not mentally off the grid and you end up in a bunker with your food, your Bibles, your collection of Friends DVDs, you're in a bunker locked down against something that doesn't exist. So you're not off the grid mentally. You just put yourself into a one-man FEMA cell. It's like FEMA camp, totally decentralized. Everyone is their own prison warden. Mike Wolf says, psychologists and psychiatrists are the ultimate psyop. They milk people dry for years and years. I don't know. You know, I find these interesting topics. I am very interested in psychology and psychiatry. It's interesting to think about how much is known and weaponized against us. I mean, just consider Sigmund Freud, Edward Bernays, Netflix, CEO, co-founder. It's like, what's going on here? Roberto says, most will choose short-term convenience over long-term freedom. Well, the division here is between the believers and the knowers. And the masses have been trained to be believers because they've been taught that their own ability to gather information is insufficient and they need to outsource quite a lot. And out of habit and tradition and I guess some laziness, they have outsourced a great deal. They've put a lot of trust into it. But the mass media at large is essentially the one world religion. So in a sense, this is good news. You don't have to worry that the one world order religion is coming because you've already accepted it. You are already born into it. You hide in the bunkers until the Great Reset is over. Isn't that the story in Fallout? They go into the bunkers and then they're generations deep into this thing. When they finally come to the surface, the world above has been destroyed and they've been living in a bubble. Totally brainwashed. Okay, continuing. Minds.com/Infinite Plane Society. We were talking about Bill Gates' birthday. Yeah, just interesting numbers here. Bill Gates born today. Elvis took the shot today. 10:28 again. World Trade Tower. North Tower collapsed at 10:28. The new one's definitely a big needle. The new tower opened on 11/3, by the way. Inferno released on 10/28. Inferno is just the story of COVID. These dates are interesting when you look at how they seem to be conveying something. And then the environmentalists were saying also that we had 1,028 days left to live. And I think that means somewhere in 2030. Ryler says, Rogan's views are BS. He's not that popular. I don't know anybody that watches him. Well, that video he did with Trump, that podcast had 1 million hits per hour. I think I last checked it, like 25 million, 30 million. He is the most popular podcaster on the planet, like it or not. And as far as, do I know anybody who listens to him? No, I don't. But I don't know that many people in my real life that are outside of Normieville. And Rogan's he's mostly Normieville, but I don't know. Kind of leans MSM plus with many of his guests. David says, if you wear Kamala's shirt, these podcasts will be taking place in a hospital bed. Yeah, it would be a provocation. Okay, thank you, Rylers. So the 1,028 days will be up on March 26, 2025. So there's not that much time. Basically, spring equinox, right? Spring equinox. Time's up. The movie Leave the World Behind was released on Kennedy's assassination date, 11/22. Took place in a zip code 19963, like 1963. But it released to the Netflix on 12/8. And the bridge Yeah, the bridge, the Francis Scott Key Bridge. Again, Francis Scott Key National Anthem. That bridge was hit and it collapsed at 128. So we have found quite a bit with this 128 thing. And it's all correlating to this blackout, this crash. Okay, let's move on. Okay, let's see. Catching up on my Twitter feed, you can follow me there. It is at IPS Think Tank. We've been just really discussing the build-up for 11.5, 11.6, and the significance of 10.28. As I pointed out at the beginning, Marty McFly wakes up at 10.28, and Back in Time by Huey Lewis and the News is playing. 10.28, out of time, just as Donald Trump is on the cover of The New Yorker, and he is, I think they said on there, Back to the Future. He's like they're endorsing him. By the way, if you're waiting for press passes, I'm getting them printed locally, so they're coming. Appreciate your patience. Nothing's going to be forgotten. Someone's paintings that went out to the UK or something came back. I'm sending those back out. Demetria says 326 was the Scott Key Bridge collapse. 326 was the Baltimore Bridge collapse. Okay. Yeah, the bridge event was pretty interesting. Obviously fake, but it had some connections, like the Francis Scott Key Monument at the Golden Gate Bridge. These are all props, and I think these are worth looking at. Leave the World Behind, again, if you remember the name, it's an anagram for Behold the End War Live. And I wouldn't be shocked if they pulled off a civil war like in the movie. And in the movie, they make the point to show that the media is experiencing the war. Nobody else cares. People aren't watching it. And so, since they're not watching it, it's like it doesn't exist to them. So you don't have to watch the Civil War in the movie Civil War. Pretty blunt movie, not too subtle in its stereotypes, and you know who is who in the movie, who represents the MAGA, their attitude towards media. Obviously, they caught rage viruses on the internet, and they became radicalized, and they turned violent. But of course, at the end of the movie, they take out the Trump character. And there's been a few movies. I mean, I have to do another follow-up to the predictive programming instances of Donald Trump getting it, but A Man in Fool comes to mind, but Civil War is probably the most blatant, and they specifically insist, because they're trying to film him being killed, and they insist on getting a woman, a black woman soldier, to do the deed. So they're not even concealing the intent there, what they're implying. Isabel Ann says Bill Gates was recently eating a hot dog in Times Square. Yeah, I saw him just walking around, and I thought, that's not what I heard. I thought that he was in Gitmo. Like, all that QAnon hopium, it's like run dry. I don't hear much from the QAnons anymore. But they believed all these things for years, and now what? Like, what is left? Some people thought JFK Jr. was going to show up at Madison Square Garden. That didn't happen. Yeah, Tozer, about October 28th. So you got Bill Gates' birthday, Elvis taking the vax. We have the Inferno connection, which ties into that as well. The first Q drop was on 10/28 as well. And somebody said that the guy who invented the polio vax, I think he was born or he died on that day. There was some significance to that as well. And all of this makes more sense as scripting than coincidence when you just recognize how far back these events are planned in broad strokes. Algae Rhythm says, any auto hoaxers here in Mexico? I'll be there in January. Well, Auto Hoax Con is a conference. The next one's going to be in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks. Fakeologists will be a part of it. But the idea is eventually these will be conventions. They will be in person. We have to move copies of Auto Hoaxology 101. We have to really fill up the parallel media with a lot of people who are on the same sheet. Not that we believe the same things, but that we have the same outlook with regard to media consumption. Active and skeptical, informed non-believers. And it's totally against the grain. I've been getting into this conversation with, what's his name? Sink Lloyd. And, he thinks I'm making a mistake by categorically rejecting MSM+. Okay, so here's what he said. Because Linda was asking, why does the vax topic and others keep coming up? And Lloyd said to me, you have to study every alt media theory and determine which ones are truth or bait and which ones aren't likely to be. Rejecting everything in alt media is just silly. The stats say there's a depopulation going on. You have nothing to support your theory except presumption. So I don't believe in depopulation. And what I said to him is, I categorically reject alt media for the same reason I reject mainstream. Even if they're right once in a while, they are still mired in falsehood. So the mainstream news may tell you that the sky is blue, but they're not a valid source. A mainstream media, alt media are two sides of the same coin. It's not a false equivalence. Not at this point. You can't make the argument that this is a false equivalence, that truthers somehow have a higher truth count than mainstream. No, they absolutely don't. They're unconscionable liars. They don't care. I get these chemtrailers all day. I talked to one the other day. He said, I know for a fact chemtrails are real because I was an outfielder in Little League and I used to look at the sky and the sun was yellow and there were no cirrus clouds. And I'm like, cirrus clouds were named in 1807 and the sun doesn't have a color. It's light, it's white, has all the colors, depends on the time of day. And if you think the sun used to be yellow, it's because you're conflating memories of yourself as a child watching cartoons. You remember the Teletubby sun, or you colored with crayons the yellow sun, and you probably remember it had a smiley face. But the fact is, these are soft lies, but they are lies. And then there's faulty causality, where they mistakenly think condensation trails cause the cirrus cloud cover that grays out the sky. So that's not a lie in the sense of it being malicious and wittingly, like they're not getting any duper's delight out of it, but nonetheless, it's a misconception and it's a falsehood. I will call it a lowercase l lie. And you shouldn't be, in my opinion, you shouldn't be averse to trying to understand the other side. And I don't represent like climate change believers, but I'm just pointing out the facts that have been there for a long time that truthers tend to ignore. And until somebody can address the Appelman chart, they have nothing to stand on with regard to their chemtrail fantasy. Nicotrauma says, I categorically reject anything that comes out of Lloyd's mouth. Well, Lloyd is an exponent for the MSM plus world view. He's an MSM pluser. No shame in that. It's useful to have such around. I mean, he said, for example, I said 5G towers are perfectly safe. There's one right outside my office. And he said, well, you don't know that they're not safe. You don't know the long-term effects. And I'm like, well, okay, if that's your standard of evidence, then you can't argue against it. You can't falsify it. It's almost like voluntarily being so extra cautious about everything that you're just paranoid. But then if you're that paranoid, where's your tinfoil cap? Where's your chemtrail mask? Nicotrauma says, it doesn't matter what side of the argument you take, Tim. Lloyd will disagree with you for the sake of disagreement. Yeah, he might just be a contrarian, but he is very informed about certain issues. But he doesn't agree with me that anti-vax is a controlled position. And my contention, and I'm glad that we have him around, because I am able to, I think, better articulate where we're coming from by examining where the other side sees things. So from their perspective, they're the anti to the mainstream pro. Like pro MSM perspective is full of lies, so they're just the anti. And I've said that we can no longer associate with the antis because they're controlled by the same hands. They accept the screen's authority. So I have taken the position of anti-anti. which includes I'm anti-vaxxer. But that also means that I'm anti-pro-vaxxer. Like I'm a non-participant in this particular debate. I don't have any interest in it. Both positions have no credibility with me. I haven't seen anything to substantiate what either side says. But it's interesting how these are essentially equivalent panics, and each side is panicked by the other. So I just don't care about the issue anymore. And it just comes up once in a while. And the depopulationists always confuse me because they're like, oh, we're running out of people. And I'm like, well, the borders are open. Millions are coming through. So makes up for it. And they're like, well, we don't want those people. I'm like, wait a minute here. So you don't want to be depopulated, or you are actually saying depopulation theory when you mean white replacement theory, which is what they're really espousing, often without even knowing it. And it's also a hoax. There is no white genocide. That's a hoax. And I know whenever these videos end up on BitChute, you have a lot of people who believe that stuff. And then they'll say that I'm working for Mossad and I'm going to get them all killed and genocided. And I'm like, no, you're following along with some kind of a psyop, to be honest. Algorithm says, I wish more normies would call in. Well, that's one of the possible results of going to a Trump rally. We have to have a meet-verse, real world stage representation. So if I go up as Infinite Plane Radio and I bring up the conversation, I bring up the topic in our conversations, about media fakery, Trump being complicit, January 6th being a hoax, nobody went to jail for January 6th. I could promote Woo's News, for example. It might draw in a lot more people into the conversation. And I wouldn't mind talking to normies because I spend a lot of time talking to truthers. But this has been the agenda. I said this about a year and a half ago, that as we began this idea of the parallel media and splitting, is that we're not going to proselytize, but we're going to challenge the alt media. And anybody who's salvageable will join us. And as we burn down those guardrails, eventually we will make our way to Normieville. So I'm not interested in confronting normies until we have more numbers. And our numbers are going to be solely composed of those who are on this side of the screen, the off-world stage perspective. But this perspective needs representation, it needs numbers, and it needs to be consistent and coherent. Like, we're not opening the tent to conspiracy theorists or info warriors or QAnons or any kind of political identity politics, race warriors, any of that nonsense. Just not allowed, not welcome. They wouldn't even find any value in this, to be honest. The people who believe that people really die would have no interest in our perspective because it takes them out of the game. And I'm not being played. I'm not a pawn on the power elite chessboard. Yeah, exactly, Lean Dion. Tell the MAGAs what fake news actually means. But I will be live streaming it, should I go. And there's no reason I shouldn't go. I've been sort of thinking, should I go low key and watch it? But now I'm thinking I might just have a golden opportunity here because the election cycle is about to be over. And the chance of meeting a bunch of MAGAs in one place, it's probably never going to happen again. And here they are just miles away from my door. So I would be remiss if I didn't go. And I'm going to do my best to find somebody to help with the production. And if you have any suggestions, questions you want me to ask, by all means, I plan to have a list. We will have, I don't have that much time to be on Discord tonight, but tomorrow I want to record another episode of the IPS. I don't have a political agenda. I will talk to both sides. I'll talk to the MAGAs, and I guarantee, just because of where we are, there will be plenty of counter-protesters. Okay, so tomorrow we will be on Discord. Let me go ahead and look at the numbers here. Looks like we're doing pretty good. And I'm still behind on archives, so you're going to be getting those in the email very soon. Observing Reality said you should go. If it goes viral, imagine the eyeballs on auto-hoaxing. Yeah, that's what I'm really thinking here. This could be an opportunity to go full-on, full-blown auto-hoaxer. on the world stage and get some real reactions, because we're qualified to do so. And I don't know if anybody else would go up to a group of MAGAs in their natural habitat in full regalia and tell them your God is false. But I will. I will do it. I went down to a climate change rally once, and I pretended, because I had a sign that said, like, stop global warming, but on the other side it said climate change is a hoax, Earth is flat. Like, I went out and I trolled a gathering of thousands of people. Like, I'm not a stranger to expressing opinions, so like I don't have any reservations against it. And I really don't think MAGAs get violent. I think you're more likely to get violence from the lefties, which is ironic because the lefties are like basically they're not really the fighters. The MAGAs are the ones who are armed. But the MAGAs are actually misrepresented by the media. It's kind of sad if you think about it. You take like the diehard nationalists and then you paint them up like a bunch of clowns, and you do a bunch of psyops and blame it all on them. But I'm curious to see if people are reasonable, and I wouldn't be surprised. I'm actually expecting the people on Trump's side to be open to it, or to be completely dismissive, or if they do think it's real, they're going to agree that it was a good idea. The lefties will likely believe in it just because they think Trump is so terrible, that Trump deranged, but they won't be able to plug it into anything that makes any sense. Like most of the people I've been following on this topic are coming at this from a partisan angle. The only valid perspective to be discerning fakery and calling it out is the off-world stage perspective. That's why it doesn't mean anything when lefties are calling this a hoax, because they're not looking at it in the context of a totally controlled media, left and right. All right, well, this has been fun. Appreciate all the comments. We'll continue this tomorrow. Definitely we'll be hitting up our Discord server. LG says they'll be paid agitators. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. This is a border town. There's a lot of people here who are very sensitive to the topic of the build the wall. A lot of people resent that. So we will see. But I'm not sure where it's at. I'll find out here in the next couple of hours. But my plan is to just drive down there right when it opens, 8 a.m., and get as many interviews as I possibly can. And if you want to support that, I put a link in the newsletter. My objective is to hire a camera person so I can focus on the interview and get some quality footage that can be included in the documentary later, but also we can use it for its potential virality. This is Autohoaxology by Symbia. Thanks for joining. We'll be caught up on everything likely tomorrow.
I don't believe in chemtrails, I don't live in Trutherville. Just because you saw it on the screen doesn't make it real. I don't take the red pill, I don't take the blue pill. I just choose to follow my dreams, Autohoax and chill. I stepped off the world stage and I've moved away from all the fake outrage and the hearsay. And I don't give the time of day to those who naysay, because they got a backhand, so the mind is. I stepped away from the game entirely, I won't be caught up in their lame dichotomy. I stepped away from the cage entirely, I'm free today and my mind's been set by reading Autohoaxology, out of the control system finally. I know where to go if you follow me, cause I've been reading Autohoaxology, nothing can bother me. Autohoaxology, won't put the screen before it's blasphemy. I won't become another mind war casualty. I came about the realm of possibility to take the helm of this reality, cause I've been chillin' reading Autohoaxology, rejecting all the expectations of the auto-believer, to become a new creation on the raft of receivers. Standing on the sword of truth, I step the facts of deceiver, demanding burdens of the proof from all the hacks and believers. I stepped away from the game entirely, I won't be caught up in the lame dichotomy. I stepped away from the cage entirely, I'm free today and my mind's been saved by reading Autohoaxology, out of the control system finally. I know where to go if you follow me, cause I've been reading Autohoaxology, nothing can bother me. judgment, you won't get a reaction. Won't defend it, I won't budge until I get all the facts in. I won't argue with the bots about the next current thing. Crying over the fake bodies like a bitter